your contribution to helping Ford vehicles into some of the James Bond films. Can you tell a little bit about that story or what that process was like?
Yeah, it's one of my prouder moments. The first time a Ford Mustang was ever shown on screen in a movie was Goldfinger. When the Mustang was launched, that relationship brought Mustang to the big screen in a huge way. It took me a while, but I reached out to Barbara Broccoli, and she was incredibly gracious. And look, we owned Aston Martins, so I knew we had the ability to get into the project through that, but to be affiliated with that franchise, amazing. And I got to go to the royal premiere in London, and I sat a couple of rows behind the Queen, and amazing. I mean, I have to say I feel blessed to have journey, and some of the people I've met and the things I've gotten to do are just like, unbelievable.
Today we have Al Uzielli, Global Brand Entertainment for Ford Motor Company. He is Global Brand Entertainment. Thank you so much for joining us today, Al.
I'm really happy to be here, guys.
Could you just tell us a little bit about your personal journey? I know you've had such an interesting career. Could you just give us a little background?
Sure. So I grew up in New York City, and kind of from a very early age, I knew I wanted to be in entertainment. I wasn't really sure where. I think for about 5 minutes, I thought about acting, and then I thought about directing, and then I ultimately landed on producing. And kind of from ninth grade on, everything I did educationally was to lead me down that path. I went to boarding school, and there was a film class there, and I took that, and then I went to Boston University and I studied film. And then after graduating from BU, I went to the American Film Institute as a producer and got my master's. And then once I was done with that, I became an independent producer, and I had met a gentleman at AFI who lived in Denver. Basically, when school was done, he left, went back to Denver, and he left me with a couple of scripts. Kind of knowing what I was doing, but not really. I went out and I had some friends in the business, some agents, some producers, and I just started like cold calling and seeing if anybody would take a meeting, anybody would read the scripts. Ultimately, I sold 2 of them really quickly. And I was like, wow, this business is great. It's so easy. And then, they sat in development for years. One of them actually ended up getting made not too far off. It was called The Proposition. And Kenneth Branagh, William Hurt, Madeline Stowe, and Neil Patrick Harris. And it was a period piece set in Boston, a kind of romantic tragedy. The best time, like going back to Boston where I'd gone to school, now as a producer, and living at the Ritz, and going out to the Crane Estate, which is this beautiful mansion outside of the city, and shooting for a few months. And it was an amazing experience. And ultimately, the studio that put it out went out of business almost right when the movie was ready to be released. So we had a very short, and this is before the internet was showing content. We had a very short theatrical run, and then it went right to DVD. And but I was really proud of it, and certainly as kind of coming out of the gate, putting aside the films that I made in film school, which were terrific, and a real learning experience. This was my first film, so I thought everything was going to be rosy after that. And then I started on this really interesting, frustrating, beautiful journey as an independent producer, and did a handful of, forgetful films. I definitely learned a little bit after the start about just how challenging it is to be an independent producer in Hollywood. But the good news is I met a ton of people. I learned how things work. When time was ticking on, and I realized it wasn't necessarily as joyful as I thought it was going to be, as creative as I thought it was going to be. And I thought, is this really what I want to spend the rest of my life doing? And right around that time, I was producing an independent film called Bongwater, which starred Luke Wilson and Jack Black and Brittany Murphy, and really fun. But I met Steven Soderbergh while I was producing that film, and he was making Out of Sight. And he came to me because of my family relation back to Ford Motor Company, and asked me if I could help him get some Crown Vics for the movie. And I was like, wow, I don't even know how that process works. So it could be an interesting learning experience. And thanks to Steven, I delved into this world of product placement. And I realized that Ford Motor Company, as vast as it is, at the time there were 8 brands under the Ford umbrella, was a very difficult company to maneuver. And so if you were an entertainment property or celebrity or producer, anybody trying to get to Ford or one of its brands, it was a very challenging process. So I connected with some colleagues, well, some soon-to-be colleagues in Detroit who were in the marketing organization. And we started crafting this model to create an office in LA that would be the central point of contact for the entertainment community to reach out to Ford, or for Ford to reach out to the entertainment community. We were basically trying to maneuver a tanker to do something differently in the marketing space, which was no easy feat. But the colleagues that I worked with, who ultimately were with me for the first couple of years in the office, were terrific. And ultimately, we opened Ford Global Brand Entertainment in Beverly Hills in 2003. And we started building up our reputation as being, the Ford Entertainment office in Hollywood. And collaborated with all of Ford's agencies. I was an internal employee. When we opened, it was really an internal office. So Ford had a big presence in Irvine, and we took some people from that office, and then one gentleman from Dearborn who would come back and forth, and we opened Ford Global Brand Entertainment. And then, cut to today, 20 plus years later, it's a very different office. In fact, you're looking at it. But it's a really exciting time now. It's certainly not anything like I expected it would be 20 years ago. And as you guys know all too well, I mean, media has changed violently. Our industry has changed violently. I mean, violent is probably not a good word, but it's been a real, seismic shift in everything. So being able to keep up with all that has been a really interesting challenge. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And I've certainly learned from the mistakes almost more than I've learned from the successes.
So cool. Thank you for that background. I have a question for you. So I was watching a movie and they mentioned Ford. So if they mention Ford in a Hollywood movie, do they have to come through you to get approval for that? How does that work?
If they show the Ford Blue Oval, technically, they should come through. It's myself, and I work with a lot of our internal general counsel folks. Also understanding it's kind of a gift. I mean, it's great that people want to actually use our product, and it's happening a lot, which is really nice. But I don't know about a verbal mention.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, oh, did Al coordinate with them? That was the first thought that came to my head. So
You mentioned that when you were ideating about this role within the organization back 20 years ago, that Ford didn't have a precedent for how these types of engagements with Hollywood were conducted. But was there precedent at all, like industry wide? Were different car companies or brands at large just doing it on a case by case basis their own way? Like, what was there a protocol that you were then looking to adapt for Ford specifically? What did that look like?
So there was a process at Ford. It was a challenging one. There were multiple agencies getting paid a lot of money. And I'm not talking about our internal agencies. I'm talking about kind of agencies that work specifically in product placement and things like that. Essentially, it was you submit a proposal, and it went through a lot of sort of stop points along the way, and you ultimately got approved or disapproved, and it was a very long and arduous process. And then having the 8 brands too, each brand had a domestic, international sort of, I guess it was technically an agency reviewing these. And, if you were a producer trying to figure out that path to approval or rejection, it was really difficult. And so I did that. when I was trying to help Steven out. And I also found out like the budgets for these things, and they were really high. I mean, I would love to have budgets like that to work with, but basically that's when, with the folks that I connected with in Dearborn at Ford in marketing, and I sat down, we're like, there's got to be an easier way. And also, we need to be a proactive partner. We don't want to just sit back and wait for the phone to ring about somebody who wants a car. We need to scour the trades. We need to understand what's going into production and understand who are the partners that we want to work with, and not necessarily wait for them to call us. I mean, look, we were 5-6 years into it, and I was still hearing like, God, we didn't know you guys were out there. Yes, it's great to get cars in movies or create content or work with talent, but especially in Los Angeles, the level of influence that lives within that city. We wanted people to understand what Ford was and what it stood for and what our products were like. And even at the end of the day, if it didn't turn up on screen somewhere, we still knew that somebody of influence, whether it was a agent or even a gaffer, was walking around with a better understanding of what our business was like. And that's value.
That is really interesting.
One of the things that I read in doing research for this, Al, was your contribution to helping Ford vehicles into some of the James Bond films. Can you tell a little bit about that story or what that process was like?
Yeah, it's one of my prouder moments, and I will say, as a film buff and as somebody that went into my professional life as a producer, it was kind of it was a dream come true. So Ford had been in a Bond movie before I opened the office. It was Die Another Day, and it did a good job of kind of going across all the brands that we had at the time. The first time a Ford Mustang was ever shown on screen in a movie was in Goldfinger. When the Mustang was launched, that relationship brought Mustang to the big screen in a huge way. So I reached out. I mean, it took me a while, but I reached out to Barbara Broccoli and started, pulling screenshots off the internet of new cars we had coming out and things like. And I put together this hokey little presentation, and I wasn't. It was relatively new. I think this was probably 2005, and the office had only been open for a couple of years, and she was incredibly gracious. And look, we owned Aston Martin, so I knew we had the ability to get into the project through that, but there was also a desire to bring another product or two into the fray and take advantage of that relationship. And so of all the vehicles, we got the Ford Mondeo, which was essentially the European version of the Taurus. So the moment in the film really played naturally. It was a rent-a-car when he was in the tropics, beautiful like driving shot of him, on a mountain road in some Caribbean island. And then Ford of Europe activated a considerable co-promotion campaign.
Yeah.
And then we went on to do Quantum of Solace, which was fun too. And we used the Edge, and then ultimately helped launch the Ka in Europe as well, which was driven by the Bond girl in that movie. But my God, to be able to work on, I mean, not work, but to be affiliated with that franchise was amazing. When I got to go to the Royal premiere in London, and I sat a couple of rows behind the Queen, and amazing. I mean, I have to say I feel blessed to have been on this journey, and some of the people I've met and the things I've gotten to do are just like, unbelievable.
That's so cool. Well,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. When you appear, well, first off, Ford's such a large brand, obviously, to begin with. Like, if it was an unknown brand appearing in a James Bond film, they might see a huge spike. Do you see a huge spike with Ford purchases after appearing in like a James Bond film like that? Or is it more just general brand awareness for Ford?
That's really the golden egg. The ability to measure what we do in my division is a real challenge. And I've always been held to task by that. And I think like that's why my budgets are smaller. That's why we don't really throw as many resources at this, and there have been plenty of agencies that have come along claiming to be able to measure the success rate of product placement. And I believe some of them to a certain extent, but I think American Idol was probably the closest, and I wasn't a part of that relationship significantly. But because it was on television, because there was traditional advertising alongside of it, and we did understand that when you place a product in a TV show, it does help to have the commercials running within that content. Now that the streamers are really starting to work with us, I'm hoping that there's going to be some level, and there might already be a metric that that our media team acknowledges and believes in. But to the best of my knowledge, for the lion's share of time that I've been spending doing this, I've never really been able to measure the success of what I've been doing. I mean, now we can see how many eyeballs and things like that, especially if we do digital initiatives. But how many of those eyeballs are actually walking into a dealer or going online and digging deeper into the product? I don't know. I guess where I stand, and this goes back to kind of what I was talking about earlier, just to have people talk about us, in my opinion, is the best we can hope for, at least in some of the projects I've done, because like we talked about, I think the emotional element of storytelling, if it's done right, engages a conversation.
Would you say, Al, that that's what a smaller brand could take away from Ford too? Like, obviously, when a smaller company is looking at the larger companies, they're looking at what they aspire to be, what they hope that their advertising could be like, or their product placement, how they market themselves, how they do their PR, how they do so many things. What do you think a smaller company could take away from Ford that Ford is doing really well that could benefit them potentially?
One thing I would say, and I may be held to task about this, but a car could almost be considered a cast member. I mean, it's such a prominent item. And there's motion to it. There's a life to it in a way. If I was another brand with a product that wasn't as inherent to the story, it would be challenging, because essentially, you have to either pay your way in, or you have to figure out, how does my product align with the character, the story, anything like that, to the point where the director needs it. Almost every character in every movie drives. And so I wouldn't even, and I've often been interested, I've tried to meet the people who have my role in other sectors, and I haven't been too successful with that, but it's challenging. And also, the studios, the networks, the streamers, they're all very savvy to the value that we get from being part of that content. One thing holds true in Hollywood and entertainment is relationships. Where that ends up, I don't know. I mean, I like to know everything I can about the product that I'm buying. Like, what's the story? How is this made? And we often do that with our vehicles. We don't necessarily expect to be placed in films and stuff all the time, but we want people to understand how unique a product it is that they're driving.
Yeah, I feel like everyone knows a lot of the history of Ford, which is the transparency in general is maybe something to take away.
Yeah.
That's what I see in Ford, at least from my end. A lot of other car companies I don't know as much about them, but with Ford, I feel like I know the whole history. It's almost feels like a familial brand. I don't know, like.
I have a question, Al. What in your career has been the most rewarding part for you?
It's a tough question. Two projects really stand out for me. One is the documentary about the Ford Mustang, which is called A Faster Horse. When we saw the 50th anniversary of that nameplate approaching, my division really wanted to come up with a unique way to kind of celebrate that. And in my 20 years and all the meetings that I've had, I can't begin to tell you how many people come in and sit down and tell a Mustang story. It feels like everybody has a Mustang story. Mm-hmm. So when I got the green light internally to do it, my charge to myself was, this has to be made like a movie. It can't be made like anything from a marketing standpoint. And so I had a friend who had produced some really cool music docs. This guy, Nigel Sinclair, he had done a terrific George Harrison doc. He did a Billy Joel doc. And so I went to him and basically said, I want somebody to tell the story of the Mustang who knows nothing about it. Somebody from a world that has nothing to do with automotive. And so we landed on this amazing director named David Gelb, who at the time had just directed Jiro Dreams of Sushi, would later go on to create Chef Table.
Yeah.
After. And at first I was like, he's done a movie about sushi, and how is that going to translate to talking about this iconic nameplate? And the more I thought about it, I mean, it's a beautiful lyrical film. It was about a family business. It was about manufacturing a product. It was about making that product coveted and selling it to the consumer. It just happened to be fish versus, Mustang. His only connection to Mustang was like when I used to come out to LA, I would rent one, and I drove it and it was fun to drive. And that was pretty much all he knew about it. We set him loose. I stayed as much in the background as I could and really let him tell the story that he wanted to tell. And, it got into Tribeca. It sold at Tribeca. We did not pay for the media for that. It came out on multiple platforms, including Netflix. And it was, I mean, look, I think, it was so Mustang, obviously, but what was incredible was the human stories of the engineers, the executives, and then like the people who love that car, the families who have grown up, driving one after the other, the father and the daughter that have rebuilt, a classic Mustang together. I mean, all those things were just like, yes, it's a movie about a car, but there's such a human element to it. So talk about great storytelling. In my opinion, David and the producing team of that really did a beautiful job of storytelling.
I feel like when I think of the classic American car, I think of the Mustang. It's impossible not to think of the Mustang. I had a friend growing up. His father had a beautiful old Mustang, and he actually had a painted photo of his Mustang hanging on their wall, and they had this beautiful mansion, and they had a photo of
They are a passionate group.
very passionate. And
Michael, didn't you tell me that your grandmother's first car was a Model T?
yeah, my grandmother, her father was the first person to own a car in Niagara Falls, New York.
Wow.
And it was a Model T Ford. So
That's amazing.
yeah,
So what year would that have been?
I think it was the year the Model T came out, that car, and that was the first car my grandmother had. My grandmother was born in 1926, so she's 98 now.
Oh, wow.
Really cool, though. Our family's just so passionate about Ford, the cars, the whole thing. So
Thank you for your passion.
yeah. In terms of today, when we look beyond like Hollywood, I know we're talking a lot about Hollywood and integrating Ford products into films. But when you look at platforms like social media, video podcasts, stuff like that, there's obviously a lot going on there too. How does Ford like make an attempt to reach out to people in that category as well? Is that a part of your role, or is that more of just an organic thing that happens?
I can't say that I've done a lot of work in the podcast space. Digitally, yes. I think that's a very important platform for us. And I wouldn't say that we're not focusing on podcasts. I have to think we are. In fact, our CEO, Jim Farley, has his own podcast, which is terrific. I think, look, like I said earlier, our audience or our consumer is everywhere now. I mean, they're so fragmented that we have to be in all these spaces if we want to reach them. And digital, yes. I mean, the influencer space and all that stuff. I mean, I don't consider myself an old man, but it's like, that it changes so much. And I find I have to ask my daughters, like, sometimes, who's this person and who's that person, and get their thumbs up before we really like dive into whether or not they might be right to work with. But yeah, I mean, it's no question that the social media platforms are where people are consuming a lot of content. So we have to be there.
So I know you mentioned it's difficult to think of from a perspective of a company that's not a car company, what type of advice you might give. But if you had to distill down even just 1 or 2 points of advice for brand marketers, what might they be?
If it's a smaller business and it's product driven, get that product out however you can, and to take risks. And I mean, obviously you have to worry about your bottom line if you're a new business and starting out, but the entertainment business or Hollywood loves freebies, and again, to just deliver those products to the people that could really make a difference about it. And I also think don't worry so much about the immediate ROI. I think, getting it in front of the right people and having them respond in some way, it's going to be a slow build. I've never gone down that road, so I really don't have the legitimacy to say it, but I can even speak from, an automotive brand. That's part of our things too. It's like we will call people and say, "Hey, you want to drive the new Mustang for a couple of weeks and see what it's like?" Without any we don't say you have to post about it socially or things like that. It's just like go out and drive it and see what you think about it. And I think there's a ton of value in that. So, if you're selling cars or if you're selling chocolate chip cookies, it's like, get it in front of the right people that are going to talk about it and just see where that takes you.
That's so true. Yeah, just getting in front of an audience and then seeing where it goes from there.
10 phone calls you'll get hung up on, but there's going to be one where they're like, "I love chocolate chip cookies. Send them over."
I can't imagine more than one. Yeah, I can't imagine 9 people saying they don't like chocolate chip cookies. Maybe this particular person's chocolate chip cookies are not very good. I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Al. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Oh, this is great. Thanks you guys for doing this. I think I think back to when I was starting out, if there'd been something this informative that I could have learned from, it would have been golden. So you guys are great for doing this. I've watched some of your other podcasts and the people that you've talked to, and it's great. I mean, I hope you're going to distribute these and get the right people to see it because it's really helpful to understand this. I mean, again, if you'd asked me when I was at film school, if I would be working for Ford, doing what I'm doing, or anybody for that. I mean, whoever knew this role existed, and back in the 80s or 90s when I was still in school, like I tell a lot of people about life in general, it's like don't always expect to end up where you thought you were going to end up, and don't be too rigid about getting there because life may take you on a diversion that gets you the same level of satisfaction and allows you to do the same sort of things, but from a place and a perspective that you never thought you would be in. And that's exactly what's happened to me.
That's so cool. That's really cool advice. I mean, we've seen that in our own careers too. I mean, both Michael and I went to film school. I think we had a vision of directing the next big blockbuster, and then we found a passion for brand storytelling and documentary filmmaking for brands, and we've loved what we've been able to do in this next horizon of just being able to talk to folks like you and other subjects and do this type of format for other clients is really exciting as well. And we never would have thought that.
I'm sure you didn't think you were going to be hosting a podcast when you started out with Seven Wonders.
No, never. But here we are and we're loving it. So awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for having me.